Story 1. Midnight in the Mojave. I've been trucking for nearly 15 years, but nothing in my experience could prepare me for what happened one eerie night in 2017. I was hauling a load of appliances through the barren expanse of the Mojave Desert, bound for a destination in Arizona. It was a typical overnight drive, one that seemed to stretch endlessly into the pitch-black darkness, the only company being the dim glow of my semi's headlights, which desperately needed fixing. The road was desolate, a straight ribbon of asphalt with no other vehicles in sight. As a trucker, you get used to the solitude, the hours of silence broken only by the hum of the engine. But that night felt different. There was an unsettling quiet that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My eyes strained to make out the road ahead, and I debated pulling over to wait for daylight. But time was money, and I couldn't afford to waste either. As the hour crept closer to dawn, something in the distance caught my eye, a glimmer that rapidly approached, growing larger and more defined. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just before colliding with what lay ahead, a car with its hazard lights blinking. The odd thing was, the vehicle was smack in the middle of the road, its passenger door ajar. Despite the initial shock, my curiosity got the better of me. Being a trucker teaches you to help out when needed, so I reversed the semi, parked on the shoulder, and approached the vehicle. The stillness of the night was suffocating, with only the rhythmic click of the hazard lights breaking the silence. The car was a new-looking red Ford Fusion, but it was completely empty, no driver, no passengers. A sense of unease washed over me as I checked the back seat and peered into the trunk from the inside. 3 black garbage bags were crammed into the space, secured with a rope that kept the trunk from closing. My heart thumped loudly in the stillness, but I couldn't resist the urge to investigate further. As I reached for the bags, a deafening gunshot pierced the night air. Startled, I banged my head on the car's roof, my heart racing with adrenaline. Panic seized me as I hurled the car keys back onto the front seat and dashed for the safety of my semi. A gruff voice shouted in the distance, and I could hear footsteps approaching fast. Scrambling into the cab, I cranked the engine, swearing as it initially stalled. As my truck lurched forward, I glimpsed a short, husky man standing at the car's trunk. He was holding a shovel in one hand and a hunting rifle in the other. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment. His face wasn't crazed or deranged, just worried. He waved his arms and shouted something I couldn't make out, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out what he wanted. I floored the gas pedal, sending my truck roaring down the deserted road. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see him disappear into the night, but instead, headlights soon appeared, gaining on me fast. My heart pounded in my chest as the car sped up, riding dangerously close to my bumper. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 while trying to keep the truck steady. Just as I was explaining the situation to the dispatcher, the car behind me pulled alongside, headlights flashing wildly. The next moments were a blur of chaos. The car swerved in front, forcing me to brake hard to avoid a collision. Then, out of nowhere, police lights flashed ahead, casting a red and blue glow over the dark road. The car swerved off to the right, disappearing into the desert's shadows. I pulled over, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief as I waited for the officer to arrive. Breathlessly, I recounted the night's bizarre events, but to my frustration, the cop seemed more interested in taking my report than chasing the guy down. He assured me they'd investigate once backup arrived, but I never heard another word about it. To this day, the incident remains a chilling mystery. Some of my fellow truckers speculated about what the man could have been burying in the desert, but I chose not to dwell on it. Instead, I hold on to the belief that whatever was in those bags, it wasn't meant for me to uncover. Yet, the memory lingers, and driving through deserted roads at night has never felt the same. Story 2. The Vanishing Stop. Trucking has been my life for a couple of years now, ever since I dropped out of college due to some personal issues. It might not have been the prestigious career everyone thought I was destined for, but the open road gave me a sense of freedom that was hard to resist. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the night. I stumbled upon a mystery that continues to haunt me. It was about 3 months into my first job, driving a route from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana. After completing an exhausting 8-hour drive earlier, I faced another 12-hour stretch ahead of me. Despite the fatigue weighing heavily on my eyelids, I decided to push through the night, aiming to arrive just before a.m. The highway was eerily empty, which allowed me to push the semi a little faster than usual. Halfway through, I reached for a can of Red Bull in my center console, only to find none left. Cursing my forgetfulness, I realized I had no choice but to make a pit stop. I hated stopping. My truck seemed to lull me to sleep whenever it wasn't in motion. I pulled into what appeared to be a service stop, only to realize it was an old, abandoned gas station with a repurposed convenience store. It was dark and empty, an unsettling sight. Still, there was a flicker of hope when I spotted a faint glow from the back of the store. Curiosity getting the better of me, I cautiously entered the store. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing an old refrigerator emitting the glow. To my disappointment, it was completely empty-gutted even. I was about to turn back when I heard a faint noise, like something falling to the floor behind me. A chill ran down my spine as I froze, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but instead, I crept back into the main room, finding it empty and silent. The place gave off an unsettling vibe, so I decided to head to the other shop down the road. As I jogged over to the quick stop, the feeling of unease only grew. I made my purchase quickly and glanced back at the abandoned store, noticing the door was ajar. I was certain I'd closed it. The thought nagged at me as I hurried back to my truck, eager to get back on the road. Once I was driving again, the caffeine kicked in, and my mind began to process the bizarre stop. But something still felt off. A movement in my rearview mirror caught my attention, a flutter of the curtain behind the cab. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what it meant. Someone was in my truck. Trying to remain calm, I discreetly punched the nearest police station into my GPS. The drive there was nerve-wracking, every second stretching into eternity. I kept imagining someone lunging at me from behind, the threat hidden just out of sight. Finally, the police station came into view. I parked as close as possible and ran inside, my heart racing. Within moments, officers swarmed the truck, and what they found was both shocking and horrifying. 3 homeless-looking people, 2 men and a woman, were pulled from the back, wrapped in dirty blankets and glaring at me with silent menace. One of the men clutched a pair of switchblades, but none of them spoke a word. Their silence was more unnerving than any threat they could have uttered. The police didn't offer much explanation, only assuring me that they'd handle it. I was left with more questions than answers. How had they gotten into my truck? What had they intended to do? To this day, I don't have those answers, but the fear from that night lingers, a reminder of how quickly the mundane can become a nightmare. Story 3. Voices in the Woods. I've been a trucker for over 15 years, and by now, I've seen and heard it all, or so I thought. This job takes you through long, lonely stretches of road where your thoughts are your only companions. But some nights, it's not your thoughts you have to worry about. It's the shadows lurking just out of sight. This happened 4 years ago, on a chilly May morning in North Dakota. I was working for a warehouse, hauling goods across the flat plains to Montana. The workload was heavy, but the pay was good, and I was determined to finish my route in one go, without stopping for sleep. Efficiency was the name of the game, and I pushed myself to the limit. The highway stretched out before me, flanked by dense woods that seemed to close in as the night deepened. I fought to keep my eyes open, my vision blurring as the clock crept past midnight. In desperation, I reached for my smelling salts, a trick taught to me by a fellow trucker named Tristan. One sniff was like a jolt of electricity, snapping me back to full alertness. But even that wasn't enough, as I felt myself dozing off, the rumble strips on the shoulder jolting me awake. I was all alone on that dark highway, with nowhere to pull off safely. Desperation clawed at me as I slowed the truck, scanning the roadside for a break in the trees. Then I saw it, a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. Confused, I rubbed my eyes, convinced it was a hallucination. But as I rolled past, I realized it was real. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. A few hundred yards later, I passed a pair of shoes, sending a shiver down my spine. Panic set in. Something was wrong, very wrong. I brought the truck to a halt, the silence pressing in around me. My instincts screamed for me to drive on, but curiosity drew me out of the cab. The cold air bit through my exhaustion, sharpening my senses as I approached a pile of clothing on the roadside. It was children's clothing, boys' and girls' pieces mixed together. My heart pounded as I scanned the woods, half expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. I turned to head back to the truck when a loud crunch echoed from my left. I froze, straining to see into the darkness. Another crunch followed, this time from the opposite side. My instincts kicked in, and I sprinted back to the truck, leaping into the cab just as a child's scream pierced the night. I froze, caught between the urge to flee and the fear of leaving a child in danger. Another scream shattered the silence, identical to the first. Without thinking, I turned on the truck and swung the headlights toward the woods where the sound had come from. The beams lit up a cluster of trees, revealing 3 or 4 figures huddled together, one holding a massive speaker. In that brief moment, I understood they were using the speaker to mimic a child's cry, luring me into the woods. My blood ran cold as I realized how close I'd come to falling into their trap. The figures scattered, hiding behind the trees as the light exposed their deception. I reached for my phone, fumbling to call the police, but before I could finish dialing, something thudded against the side of the truck. Fear took over, and I slammed the truck into gear, flooring the accelerator. As I sped away, I glimpsed a figure on the other side of the road, shouting and throwing something that cracked the passenger window. The drive to my destination was a blur of adrenaline and terror. I didn't stop until I reached the delivery point, too shaken to rest until I was safely inside. When I finally collapsed into sleep, it was with the image of those figures etched into my mind. The next morning, I reported the incident to the police. They promised to investigate, but I never heard back. I replayed the events over and over, berating myself for stepping out of the truck in the first place. But the thought of children in danger had been too much to ignore. To this day, I don't know what those people intended or why they didn't attack when they had the chance. The memory remains a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Hey there, it's Mr. Night Horror. If you enjoyed this eerie journey and want to dive deeper into the shadows with us, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with more spine-chilling tales tomorrow. Stay haunted.